everybody. We're really excited to be here today to share a bit of the Stripe story with you, building payment infrastructure for the internet economy, the convergence of online and offline commerce, how we're building new software-based solutions, and also our visions for the future with respect to standards and assessments. But first off, quick introductions. My name's Sean Estrada, and as of this week's community meeting, I've been with Stripe 1 year. Some of you might know me from past roles that I've had in payments, one with one of our payment brands, as well as a global online retailer. While I've been at Stripe, though, I've had a chance to deeply understand the developer focus that we have and the security and compliance first mindset that we have in building our payments.
Thanks so much, Sean. And for everyone else here, my name is Roshan Sadanani. I'm a product lead within Stripe that works on our payments API platform, which is some of the core APIs and developer experiences that allow our users to move money around with Stripe. Prior to that, I actually spent close to 5 years working on in-person payments at Stripe as a founding member of the Stripe terminal team. And so what we'll be talking about today is kind of a hybrid of both online and in-person payments and the developer perspective for both.
Excellent. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. First off, a bit of an overview of Stripe, our perspective on mobile and the developer experience, and also our visions for the future state of standards. So this next slide here, we're not going to spend too much time on this, but we wanted to show the same slide that we show users when they're looking to engage Stripe. The main takeaway here is that Stripe is much more than just payments. We help build the financial infrastructure for businesses, from startups to large enterprises. And please remember that word, infrastructure. It's an important part of our ethos and how we view ways that we design, develop, and launch products. Super similar to cloud computing services, we aim to build things with security and usability as a default. But what does that mean in practical terms? Take our core payments APIs, for example. We handle the complexities and heavy lifting of secure payment ingestion and integrations so that developers can focus on building experiences that delight users. But for today, though, we want to focus specifically on mobile payments. So how many in this room have either an iOS or Android device on you right now?
It's got to be everyone.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. So hold on to that thought for a sec, because we want to share with you how that particular mobile phone can not only be used as a payment instrument, as we're all pretty familiar with, but how it can be used to accept payments today, right now, and how quickly a developer can build that experience. So let's jump right in. Anybody remember this particular image here from about a decade ago? So the last few years during COVID, of course, were a bit of a blur. So let's just round this out and call 2010 a decade ago. So what was the world like back then? Well, back then there wasn't a way to securely transact on a mobile device, except for maybe a BlackBerry. Anybody still rocking one of those? No, hope not, since they decommissioned early last year. So that image on the screen was taken from PCI's very first guidance on mobile devices. So what can we take from that particular picture? When the council was developing mobile standards, there wasn't a trusted computing platform in a consumer's hand. Basically, smartphones weren't really that smart or secure. Standards at that time had to account for those risks in the wild mobile West. So fast forward to just a bit to what was actually 10 years ago in 2013, and Apple had just released the iPhone 5S, which had their first secure enclave. At that time, hardware-based encryption and trusted execution environments fundamentally changed mobile computing. So, go to the next slide. Thank you. So based on that slide, mobile standards were really centered around a mobile phone acting as a stand-in for a payment terminal as an acceptance device. But let's pause for a bit and take a quick survey in the room on the consumer side. So how many different devices, just think about kind of what is in your sort of personal sphere right now. How many different devices do you have on you that can transact natively as a payment instrument? 2, 3, I see 4. I see 4. That's pretty cool. So examples, your mobile phone with a digital wallet or wearable, for example. That's pretty cool. So where we are with mobile payments today, they're ubiquitous. And most importantly, they're native to the technologies that we all have around us. So with respect to the industry, we're seeing a ton of changes in terms of what constitutes a payment instrument, what comprises a payment terminal, and also what we think of payment activities in general. We've seen significant growth on what we call the payment initiator side, or the consumer side. So as we all sort of have in our devices, mobile device OEMs and tech platforms are continuing to push for further digitization of payment cards, as well as developing new and innovative ways to authenticate users using things like biometrics, all in the pursuit of true person-to-person payments. So what does this mean to us in the room? Well, as I look across here, I again recognize many familiar faces. We're all in a position to help the industry from each of our respective positions to build experiences that meet the most flexible user needs and demands, but also do that in a truly secure and compliant way. So right now I'd like to pass it over to Roshan to dive a little bit deeper into how a mobile payments solution is built.
Awesome, thanks, Sean. And before I jump ahead on the slide, one of the things that I think is that we think a lot about, and I'm sure all of you all are also thinking a lot about, is that 10 years ago, I don't know if we knew how important and prevalent mobile devices would be, both in terms of payment instrument and, as we'll show a little bit later today, payment acceptance. And so it's an interesting brainstorming exercise to be thinking about, like, what is that next series of bets? And I know there's a lot of great thinking from the folks in this room to that effect. Just food for thought as we're kind of progressing through the next couple of areas here. So I want to talk a little bit about the complexity of payments, which is no surprise to, I'm sure, many of you in this room, but is worth spending a minute or two on just to help calibrate us a little bit. And in particular, I want to put ourselves in the mindset of a developer who's building a payment acceptance application. And I think it becomes pretty quickly clear how many components have to be thought about when it comes to making one of those applications successful, right? So you can see a laundry list of stuff on the right-hand side of the slide here, ranging from EMV code certifications to recertifications for new payment methods, hardware and software updates. Of course, there's key management, payment card security, not to mention, and things like L3 certifications based on geographies. I mean, the list really goes on and on. And while this is an in-person sort of specific view, a lot of the same complexity applies to online payments as well. And I think the takeaway from this slide is that when businesses are building payment applications, they need to be thinking just about a lot of different things all at once. So all that stuff on the right side of the slide, but also the stuff on the left, right? The user experience, how the commerce experience looks and feels at the point of sale or at the point of purchase. Different libraries for including add-on functionality, like maybe QR code scanning and things like this. And really that complexity results in a lot of work for a developer to have to think about as they go through this process. And one observation that we see with a lot of our customers is that developers are increasingly the decision makers in this process. And if you follow that logic a little bit, you could probably guess why. It's because that complexity falls to those teams to manage, maintain, not to mention build up front. And I think what's really interesting about that is that it really behooves, or really kind of speaks to, the importance of having good developer tools as a way to both increase adoption for these types of surfaces, but also to allow developers to compose them in a way that makes sense. And we'll talk a little bit more about the composability on the next slide. What we see, and I think what all of you are seeing as well, is that today developers pull stuff off the shelf. They can build, use APIs, low-code tools, and no-code methods to be able to process payments and effectively separate the payment processing side of their stack compared to the business logic side of their stack. What they also are able to do is rely on service providers that are upstream of those tools to handle certification and compliance, or at least help with it. So we believe that as an industry, if we increase developer knowledge of security and compliance obligations, We can truly ensure PCI compliance is taking place across the entire stack. And like I said, it's developers who are increasingly making the tactical decisions within their code that affect payment security outcomes when these applications are pushed out into the field. So to summarize this slide, a lot of words, SDKs, software development kits, are here, and they're not going away. And they're the ways that developers are really building applications through that composability that I mentioned. And I think it's a really important thing to drive home because for many of us, when we were first in the room, when we first worked with PCI and PADSS, buying an off-the-shelf software application and deploying it was the norm. And I think at least from what we're seeing with a lot of our customers, it's a vastly different landscape these days where it's a little less off the shelf. So earlier I promised spending a few minutes on composability. And so I think this diagram gives one view of that kind of world. And again, just want to think about this from a developer's point of view in dealing with each of these areas. And before I do that, though, I want to spend a few minutes on the customer journey. And so for an example here, I wonder how many of us have shopped at the eyeglasses retailer, Warby Parker. Any takers for that? I left my Warby Parker sunglasses backstage, but I think with the lights, I might have needed them. Yeah, so that is one example, I think, of a particularly unified customer experience where a customer might walk into a Warby Parker location off the street. They might scan a QR code from an ad on TV. They might make a purchase online to get some try-on frames that are shipped to their house before they walk into a store, or do the entire transaction online. And so in that business's shoes, what they care about the most is having a unified customer experience where payment can really happen at any point along that journey. Whether it's the initial trial sort of purchase and collection of payment information, whether it's starting a subscription for contact lenses, I could name probably 100 different cases where that could apply. And I think what's interesting about this is that that customer relationship as a result also can start at any point in the journey. And so if you think about, tie that back kind of to what we're showing up here, I would say the importance of building customer experiences at each one of these becomes even more important. And from a developer's perspective and how they think through this, you can think of that kind of across each of these areas that I want to walk through for a brief moment. So for the first area, obviously pre-certified card readers or certified card readers are a payment entry device. And I think the online analog of this would be online payments. We've talked about developer tools as a way to facilitate payment information collection. Off-device considerations like managing fleets of devices in the field. And then finally, mobile device features, which are increasingly being used as customer journey steps for things like collecting a phone number on a card reader, an email address, and things like this. So I think we're all pretty familiar with PCI and EMVCo falling into, or rather across, a couple of these categories. But when it comes down to sort of brass tacks here, what a developer really wants is for all of these things to work and to work seamlessly and beautifully. So they're really the first step in implementing the checkout experience that I talked about that leads to that customer journey, and for the underlying data management to make sure that the customer information from that try-on lens or try-on frames subscription later carries on to the in-store purchase and then future visits and all that good stuff. And I think one of the things that we've noticed in a lot of conversations with our customers is that increasingly these components are becoming modularized. And what I mean by that is a developer is, rather than writing all the code for all of this themselves from scratch, pulling various libraries together in order to achieve that outcome. So perhaps they're using vendor A for a loyalty solution that provides code that handles loyalty. Perhaps they're taking data from that loyalty solution and ensuring that they have a customer profile or a master data management system. And perhaps they're using another provider or vendor to collect payment information and have that link back to the customer data in order to drive a unified view of the customer across sort of the omni channels in which they participate. And I think there's a couple of sort of takeaways from that modularization, and a few of them that I wanted to highlight. So I think the first one is that modularization, kind of having each of these things be their own components, helps to abstract complexity. And I also think it helps to ensure compliance and security, because it can be that the provider of the module that takes on that risk and sort of takes on that burden, leaving developers to not have to necessarily be experts. But I think that sort of limited and abstracting of complexity is a really important value proposition that comes out of this. But then I think the other thing that comes out of this is the double-edged sword of upstream providers being the ones who are implicated in reliance and security. So in Stripe's case, if a customer uses Stripe, they depend on Stripe to keep their card data secure. And again, double-edged sword, because it puts the burden on the provider, but also gives the benefit to the developer for being able to compose those things in the way they need. So in terms of what that results in, I wanted to share a couple of sort of things here as well. One of the things that we've seen come out of this is really faster time to market, that businesses can accept payments faster now than they've ever been able to before, again, by gluing together a bunch of these components. And I think other than that, just the fact that industry standards are really important. The certifications that PCI and EMVCo publish today are not just read by folks like Sean who work on the compliance side of things, but folks like me who work on product teams where I'm working directly with engineers every day and making sure that we're following compliance the way that it needs to be done. So I'd say the standards are really broadly visible, and even to audiences that are not represented here in these community meetings. And so I always love when I can pick one of those up and be able to parse through it in a meaningful way for my teams. So just maybe some food for thought as we think about how we continue to do some good work there. Okay, so now that we've showed you how our offerings can kind of function to use SDKs and APIs to build payment experiences, I wanted to kind of hone in on one specific example of how that might work. We kind of talked a little bit generally on the previous slide. And so for this specific example, I want to talk about tap to pay on iPhone. And this is a solution that we're going to demo in a few seconds. So if you're excited to see it live, we'll show you a demo. I'm going to make sure my phone is awake for it. There we go. So let's dig a little bit into what this solution is and how this payment application came to be, and in particular, the various roles and responsibilities there are between sort of Stripe, Apple, and the end user. And we're using Stripe as an example, obviously, but you could imagine any other PSP playing a similar role here. So as you all know, from a PCI scoping perspective, small businesses are not really security and compliance experts. And I don't think we want them to be. I think that's probably an okay thing. But what's ironic about that is that those small businesses are somehow also the last line of defense when it comes to payment card security. It's the small business that has to deal with the skimmer getting put on their card reader, right? Obviously, a lot of other folks too, but this is kind of dual irony that's created. And what I think is really promising about solutions like Tap to Pay is that it kind of inverts that relationship in a meaningful way. It enables incredible functionality for small businesses by keeping them out of PCI scope and relying on the hardware-backed key stores that Sean talked about, while also giving them the ability to accept payments and carry on with running their business. So let's see how this works behind the scenes. On the left side of the diagram, you can see the mobile SDK. And so I talked earlier about SDKs and developer tools, and you can think of this as the foundation for the entire solution. An SDK should be resilient, it should be built in combination with monitoring services, and really take the heavy lifting of payment data collection and handling effectively out of the mobile device environment. So if you recall me talking about abstractions earlier, this is one example of those abstractions. The integrating application that you see there is the application that we all know and love and are familiar with. So that's what you'd expect to be distributed through the Apple App Store, the Google Play Store, or even a private repo if used for an internal use case. And then within the secure boundary of the iOS device, the application, interacts with the secure element, and in this case, Apple's secure UI, to process payment data. All of that is done while using industry standard mechanisms. So NFC, the payment network kernels, and the usual rules around handling card data. So what we've done here, kind of through this two-sided slide, is move the PCI scoped code out of the mobile device. And as a result, more focus is placed on the integrity of the mobile SDK on the left-hand side. What's nice about that is we can now leverage the on-device security capabilities that Sean mentioned to encrypt and protect payment data and handle card data processing through the backend system and the upstream PSP infrastructure. So by minimizing PCI scope to processing, handling of raw payment data, what this has the effect of doing is freeing up application developers to work with effectively card tokens and not have to handle card data themselves. The other benefit of this is that it does not trigger an assessment of the entire end user application. And I don't know about you, but I get app updates on my iPhone maybe every day, every other day, and that would be quite a pain to have to reassess every single time we needed to change some business logic. So with all that, though, this doesn't really it doesn't absolve the merchant, I should say, of their responsibility. After all, the mobile device in this scenario is still acting as a stand-in for a payment terminal. And the merchant is still responsible for the same things that they're responsible for today under the relevant SAQs. So with that, let's move over to a quick demo. And I'm sure you've all heard of MPOC, but why don't we see something live that turns those MPOC standards into real life? And what I'm going to do is actually demo a tap-to-pay on iPhone payment here. So this is just my iPhone that was in my pocket as we got up on stage here. And we built a really simple application that shows how this works. So I'm going to go ahead and run a transaction here. Sean, I'm going to charge you $150. Is that okay?
That sounds good.
Okay.
What am I buying?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
All right. And you can see the UI there. And this is the secure UI that Apple provides for the experience. And if you want to go ahead and tap your card.
Yep. And I have an American Express card here. And just for the compliance folks in the room, I am covering up my sensitive authentication data. So no funny business, please. And so real quick, just pause.
Yeah.
On the iPhone, the NFC chip is actually towards the top of the phone. So I'm going to tap towards the top.
Oop, try it again.
Sorry.
Yeah, I wonder if your thumb, there we go. Okay. I don't know if most cardholders, when they're shopping for something, cover up that data the way you did. So we'll chalk that up to a more secure payment. And I don't know if you could hear it, there's a nice little audible chime that's made as well when that payment happens. Cool. So hopefully that was fun to get to see it live. I know it's always, for me, it's always really exciting to see the standards on paper turning into the product in the field. But with that, maybe you want to hand it back over to Sean to walk us through some of a little bit more on the standard side of things.
Yeah. Oh, I think this is actually yours.
No, I have one more. I forgot. Yeah. Yes. So one last thing I wanted to talk about here before we switched over is that I wanted to wrap by talking about all of this as a journey and really an ecosystem. And what I mean by that is that the various parties that we've probably in the past thought about as sort of separate or disparate entities now really rely on working with each other in ways that they haven't had to 10 years ago, for example. You have developers who are responsible for orchestrating the SDK, integrating the payment experience, and like I said earlier, increasingly being a decision maker to deciding which ones of these solutions to use. You have merchants who are responsible for maintaining overall PCI DSS compliance, solution validation, all the things that they do today with traditional payment terminals. And then you also have the payment service provider, which builds the sort of compliance foundations, security foundations, certification monitoring services, and all these things. And what we increasingly see when we work on new products at Stripe is that it requires all of these teams within Stripe coming together, interpreting standards, and using that guidance to build really great solutions for our customers. Now over to Sean.
Sounds good. Cool. Thanks, Roshan. So back to standards and compliance. If we all remember from Lance's kickoff yesterday, he specifically said security is a journey. And I promise I actually wrote this before knowing what he was going to talk about. So we recognize and appreciate that the PCI standards are moving towards a more flexible experience for users, especially with DSS 4.0. And as Stripe is a principal PO, we work directly with the council as well as the payment brands to share our experience in building for builders. In this new world of mobile payments and mobile app development, there are many different players, and as we've talked about, many of us are here in the room today. And just to reiterate what Roshan was saying around software being sort of iterative, it's no longer something that we buy off the shelf and implement in a PCI DSS environment. Hence why PADSS has been sent off into the sunset. We think that we should view software as an additive function and address security risks along the way, as opposed to only at the end state when that piece of software is sold or implemented. And right now we broadly use the term COTS to refer to things that are commercial and off the shelf. MPOC is just the beginning of operating in this new norm, along with the PCI Secure Software Framework. We as an industry need to look more deeply into that interplay between hardware and software in order to make payments accessible for everyone. And as security professionals in this new world, we also need to consider the impact of what we do beyond our immediate users. We know security and compliance inside and out, all of us. But as we demonstrated, small merchants really don't. They just want to focus on building a solid relationship with their customers. Let's make things easier for them and end users and help them navigate the complexities of standards and certifications and truly recognize that a lot of the work is done upstream. And finally, we'd also like to encourage folks in this room to also engage with the council, sharing your experiences, feedback, and participation in things like the request for comment process, as well as the task forces. It really does take the entire community to make this work.
Awesome.
So it looks like we have probably a few more minutes, and we have some sort of prepared questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, we thought we'd make it a little bit more interactive with sort of one product guy and one compliance guy on the stage here. Sean and I actually work very closely together. we promise. Yeah, Sean, did you want to start off?
Yeah, totally. And by the way, we have our contact info there, so please feel free to reach out to us. I think we're also in the event mobile app, or just catch us at one of the breaks. But yeah, Roshan, so since, from a product development perspective, oftentimes lots of research is done into feature viability, potential customers, development costs, with compliance sort of being understood like you've got to do it. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give the compliance-minded folks in this room today when they're interacting with their friendly neighborhood product manager?
Friendly can be a stretch sometimes. I hope not, but yeah. I really like that question, and Sean actually previewed it for me earlier today, so I was thinking a little bit about how to think about that one. To me, I think it always to me starts with building the right thing for the customer and the right thing for the user. And so everything I'm doing on a day-to-day basis and everything I'm doing with my teams is starting with what is the right thing for the user here. And I think what is the most helpful when designing new experiences and new products is knowing the constraints as early in the process as possible. I've yet to meet a product manager that I work with who would not want to know about a compliance requirement up front. And so my general advice would be to just attach yourselves to the folks like me in your organizations as much as you can, and give them as early of a look into your part of the world, as soon as you can, as soon as they start thinking about the product they're going to be building. And one of the things that I know we've done in the past is regular cadences on new features, just to make sure that we're in the loop with each other there. And yeah, so I would say that. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but
yeah, that totally does. I think early engagement is also key. I just wanted to also share, from my perspective, in terms of us working together on different product launches and features, and compliance can be either an on or off switch. A lot of times things get deduced into a binary state, and having that ability to have that dialogue of interpreting requirements, crafting that sort of narrative together, really partnering, I think that's super valuable.
I'm glad you mentioned that, actually, because that was one thing I wanted to talk about as well, which is I think that I like to know how much creative interpretation I'm allowed to do, because I think compliance can be viewed as binary, and it can be viewed as scary too, right? Because when you get it wrong, it's not a good time for anyone. And so I think one of the things that I care a lot about when building experiences for customers is there gray area here? Should there be gray area here? What interpretations can we make? What peers in the industry are doing? and really creating a partnership there. And I think all those things put together, again, help us in service of building better customer experiences is really the end goal. But yeah, being able to apply an interpretive lens on top of some of the reams of paper that get sent our way is always a helpful thing. So yeah,
Totally.
yeah. Cool. Cool. Well, I think we have like 7 or 8 minutes left officially in the time. So did you want to maybe just huddle off to the side of the stage and do some Q&A? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, actually, there was one more question in terms of the app ecosystem.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
If we can, would be able to go backwards a couple slides? Thank you. Cool. Yes, I wanted to maybe spend a little bit of time talking about this from like an assessment perspective. So we sort of talked about it in terms of like how standards could be designed and what the sort of like assessment product is at the end. And we don't have any solutions for this right now, sorry. But what we do is want to share is sort of a mental model in terms of like how things function. So we all know third-party security assessments and the requirements that are inherent within PCI DSS, but also other security frameworks. We think that in this sort of ecosystem, there's lots of interconnected reliance points. When either code or product is transferred over to another entity and how payment experiences come to be. So what we would like to see in this space is just more collaboration in the industry to really better understand what that sort of risk transference model looks like, if it is risk, what those responsibilities are. That free flow of information is really, it underpins how this thing sort of functions. So just wanted to make sure that we covered that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And the fact that some of those lines of responsibility have been blurred, I think, as technology's kind of outpaced a little bit, right? So yeah.
Right.
Cool.
All right.
Well, thank you again so much, everyone. Really appreciate all the time. We're happy to stick around for a minute or two to ask any questions towards the front of the stage, since I know there's a few minutes, but if not, then I know there's another session coming up very soon. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you.